Blood stained the fresh winter snow, tracing a path to a creature that simply should not exist. Genevieve knelt beside the dying beast, knowing harboring a lycan meant the gallows. Yet as the beast's golden eyes locked onto hers, she made a choice that would shatter the kingdom's ancient peace. In the bitter, unforgiving winter of 1422, the human settlement of Oakhaven was a miserable sliver of civilization nestled against the jagged spine of the Frost Peak Mountains. It was a place where survival was a daily war against the elements and the crushing taxes imposed by Lord Edric Balthazar. For Genevieve Caldwell, a 22-year-old apothecary and outcast, survival depended entirely on the harsh sanctuary of the woods. Genevieve was no stranger to hardship. Orphaned at 10 and raised by a village that viewed her herbal remedies with a mixture of necessity and deep suspicion, she lived on the fringes. Her only true possession of value was a brilliant ruby pendant, a final, desperate heirloom left by her late mother, meant to be Genevieve's dowry or her ticket out of Balthazar's oppressive domain. It was on the eve of the winter solstice, as a howling blizzard threatened to bury Oakhaven alive, that Genevieve ventured into the tree line to harvest ghost root. The wind whipped her threadbare cloak, biting into her skin like needles. That was when she smelled it, the metallic, coppery tang of fresh blood cutting through the scent of pine. Beneath the sprawling roots of an ancient oak, a massive figure lay motionless. As Genevieve cautiously approached, her breath hitched. It was not a deer, nor a rogue bear. It was a lycan. The creature was gargantuan, with fur the color of midnight and muscles coiled with lethal tension even in unconsciousness. A grotesque, jagged silver arrow protruded deeply from its ribagure, surrounded by blackened, poisoned flesh. In the human territories, lycans were monsters, myths told to terrify children, and sworn enemies of the crown. To touch one was treason. To heal one was a guaranteed death sentence. Yet as Genevieve stood frozen, the massive wolf's chest heaved with a wet, rattling breath. Its eyes fluttered open, piercing, intelligent, liquid gold, and locked onto hers. There was no feral malice in that gaze, only a profound, silent plea. Genevieve's heart pounded against her ribs. Logic screamed at her to run, to let the winter claim the beast. But the healer in her blood, the very core of her humanity, refused. "You are going to get me killed," Genevieve whispered into the roaring wind. With agonizing effort, she dragged the massive beast through the snow, her muscles burning, until they reached the hidden cellar doors of her dilapidated cottage. It took nearly an hour to haul him down into the subterranean warmth of her root cellar. By the time she secured the heavy wooden doors, her hands were slick with his blood. In the dim light of a solitary lantern, the wolf began to convulse. Bone snapped and reformed in a sickening, mesmerizing symphony. Fur receded, muscles shifted, and within moments, the monstrous wolf was gone. In its place lay a man. He was breathtakingly rugged, with raven-black hair plastered to his forehead and a torso scarred by centuries of battle. But he was dying. The silver was burning through his veins, visible as dark, venomous tendrils beneath his pale skin. Genevieve worked feverishly. She used every drop of her precious moonflower extract, a rare coagulant she had spent 3 years cultivating, to numb the area. With sterilized tongs, she gripped the silver arrowhead. The man groaned, his back arching in agony. But he did not strike her. "Stay with me," she murmured, her voice trembling as she braced herself. With one sharp, vicious pull, she extracted the silver. The man released a guttural, earth-shattering roar that shook the very foundations of her cottage before collapsing into darkness. Just as she began stitching his flesh, a violent pounding echoed from the cottage doors above. "Genevieve Caldwell, open in the name of Lord Balthazar." It was Bailiff Harrison, Balthazar's most ruthless tax collector, accompanied by 2 armed guards. Genevieve's blood ran cold. If they searched the premises, they would find the lichen. They would both be burned alive. She raced upstairs, her hands wiped hastily on her apron, and unlatched the door. The bailiff sneered, snow dusting his heavy furs. "Your winter tithe is past due, witch. Lord Balthazar demands payment, or we seize your property and search the premises for valuables." "I have nothing," Genevieve lied, her voice remarkably steady, despite the terror suffocating her. "The winter has been hard." Harrison stepped into the cottage, his eyes narrowing as he sniffed the air. "Smells like copper and wet dog in here. Guards, check the cellar." Panic seized her. In a fraction of a second, Genevieve made the ultimate sacrifice. She reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out the delicate, heavy gold chain, holding her mother's ruby pendant. The jewel caught the lantern light, gleaming like a drop of fresh blood. "Wait," Genevieve said, her voice cracking. She held it out. "Take this. It is worth 10 times my tithe. Take it and leave my home." Harrison's eyes widened with sheer, unadulterated greed. He snatched the necklace from her trembling palm, weighing it with a cruel smile. "Well, well. It seems the apothecary had secrets. This clears your debt, Caldwell. For now." As they marched back into the storm, Genevieve sank to the floor, weeping silently. She had just traded her only hope for a future, her mother's memory, for the life of a monster she did not know. When she returned to the cellar, the man was awake. His golden eyes tracked her every movement. He had heard everything. "Why?" His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble, thick with exhaustion and disbelief. "Why would a human sacrifice her freedom for a beast?" "Because a life is worth more than a stone," Genevieve replied softly, pressing a damp cloth to his burning forehead. "And you are no beast." He stayed for 3 days, hidden in the dark, healing at an impossible rate. They spoke little, but a profound, invisible tether formed between them in the quiet hours. On the dawn of the 4th day, Genevieve awoke in her chair to find the cellar empty. The stranger was gone. The only proof he had ever been there was a heavy, blackened gold signet ring resting on her workbench, bearing the crest of a howling wolf crowned with obsidian. 3 months passed. Spring brought no relief to Oakhaven, only a thawing of the mud and an escalation of misery. For Genevieve Caldwell, the consequences of her winter sacrifice had finally caught up to her. Without her moonflower reserves, her business had collapsed. Without the ruby pendant, she had no collateral. She had sold her furniture, her winter coats, and even her copper cauldrons just to buy stale bread. She was starving, wearing rags, and completely broken. The final blow came on a damp Tuesday morning. Bailiff Harrison returned, flanked by Lord Balthazar's brutes. "Your grace period is over, Caldwell. You have nothing left to tax." He threw a heavy iron collar at her feet. "By decree of Lord Balthazar, you are to be transported to the Darrowshire workhouses. You belong to the state now." Genevieve stared at the iron collar, a hollow numbness settling in her chest. She had saved a life, and in return she was losing her own. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. It started as a low tremor, a rhythmic thudding that rattled the glass in the village windows. Bailiff Harrison frowned, stepping away from Genevieve. Through the dense morning fog, massive silhouettes emerged. A collective gasp rippled through the village square as the royal procession broke through the mist. These were not human knights. They were lichen royal guards, riding terrifying, heavily armored destriers. They wore armor of blackened steel and crimson cloaks, moving with a predatory grace that sent the local guards scrambling backward in sheer terror. At the center of the procession rode a man who commanded the very air around him. He was draped in an immaculate cloak of dark wolf fur, a heavy crown of jagged obsidian and gold resting upon his raven hair. It was King Cailan Vane, the Alpha King of the Northern Lycans, a ruler who had not set foot in human territory in a century. Lord Balthazar, sweating profusely, stumbled out of his manor, bowing so low his face nearly touched the mud. "Your Majesty, we were not informed of your royal progress. Oakhaven is honored." King Cailan raised a single, gauntleted hand, instantly silencing the lord. The Alpha's golden eyes swept over the terrified human villagers. 3 months ago, during the winter solstice, Cailan's voice boomed, rich and terrifyingly powerful, echoing off the stone buildings. "I was ambushed by assassins near these borders. I was poisoned with silver. I would have died in the snow had someone in this miserable village not dragged me into the dark, pulled the silver from my chest, and paid my executioners with a ruby pendant to keep them away." The village froze. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "The King of the Lycans? Here?" Genevieve's breath hitched. She shrank back against the wall of her cottage, clutching her tattered shawl. She looked at the towering, majestic king. It was him, the man from her cellar. But he was royalty, a god among mortals. She was covered in filth, about to be sold into slavery. Shame held her paralyzed. "I have come to claim my savior," Cailan declared, his eyes scanning the crowd, "and to repay my life debt." Before Genevieve could move, a voice rang out. "It was me, your Majesty." Rosalind, the miller's vain and opportunistic daughter, stepped forward. She dropped to her knees, batting her eyelashes. "I found you in the woods, my king. I hid you. I gave the guards my mother's ruby to save you. I have prayed for your return every day." Genevieve's heart stopped. Rosalind had occasionally helped clean Genevieve's apothecary. She must have seen the bloody rags and deduced the truth. Lord Balthazar beamed. "You see, your Majesty, the people of my lands are loyal and brave." King Cailan slowly dismounted his immense warhorse. He towered over Rosalind, his expression unreadable. He stepped closer, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. He inhaled deeply. The silence that followed was deafening. Suddenly, Cailan's eyes flashed from human amber to feral, glowing gold. A low, bone-chilling snarl vibrated in his chest. "You reek of deceit, human," he whispered, his voice laced with lethal venom. "You smell of rose water and flower. The woman who saved me smelled of ghost root, dried pine, and the purest, most terrifying courage I have ever witnessed." Rosalind scrambled backward, bursting into terrified tears. Cailan straightened up. He closed his eyes, tilting his head back slightly as the wind shifted. His chest expanded as he caught a scent. His eyes snapped open, locking instantly onto the alleyway, where Genevieve stood, trembling. The Alpha King did not walk. He prowled. The crowd parted like water, desperately trying to get out of his path. Bailiff Harrison, completely oblivious to the situation, grabbed Genevieve by her rags, trying to haul her out of the way. "Move, you filthy wretch! The king is coming through!" A roar split the heavens. Before anyone could blink, Kaelin moved with supernatural speed. He seized Bailiff Harrison by the throat, lifting the grown man 3 feet into the air with one hand. Harrison choked, his eyes bulging as the Lycan King's claws dug into his skin. "You dare touch her?" Kaelin's voice was a demonic whisper. He tossed the bailiff aside like a broken doll, sending him crashing into the mud, unconscious. Kaelin turned to Genevieve. The terrifying, murderous aura surrounding him vanished in an instant, replaced by a profound, agonizing tenderness. He took in her gaunt cheeks, her shivering frame, and the torn rags that hung from her shoulders. Slowly, the Alpha King of the North sank to one knee in the filthy mud of Oakhaven. "Genevieve," he breathed, speaking her name as if it were a prayer. Genevieve trembled, tears finally spilling over her lashes. With a shaking hand, she reached into the pocket of her ruined skirt and pulled out the blackened gold signet ring. "You dropped this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Kaelin took her small, dirt-stained hand in his massive ones, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "You sacrificed everything for a monster," he said, loud enough for the trembling Lord Balthazar and the entire village to hear. "Now the monster has returned to lay his kingdom at your feet." The journey away from Oakhaven was a blur of freezing winds and the intoxicating, radiating heat of the Alpha King. King Kaelin had not permitted Genevieve to ride in the trailing supply carriages. Instead, he had pulled her up onto his own massive armored destrier, wrapping her frail, shivering body completely within his heavy midnight wolf fur cloak. Pressed against his broad chest, listening to the steady, thundering rhythm of his heart, Genevieve realized her life as a discarded apothecary was entirely dead. As they rode past the borders of Lord Edric Balthazar's lands, she caught one final glimpse of the human lord, his face pale and contorted with a mixture of terror and simmering, venomous rage. He would not forget this humiliation. 2 days later, the jagged Frost Peak Mountains parted to reveal the majestic Lycan capital of Ethelgard. Built seamlessly into the sheer obsidian cliffs, the fortress city was a marvel of predatory architecture. Massive stone spires reached toward the heavens, bridges of dark steel spanned bottomless chasms, and the banners of the crowned wolf snapped violently in the alpine wind. For a human who had lived her entire life in a rotting wooden cottage, the sheer scale of Kaelin's domain was utterly paralyzing. But Ethelgard was not just a fortress. It was a den of wolves, and Genevieve was entirely human. The moment they entered the grand courtyard, the atmosphere shifted. Hundreds of Lycan nobility and warriors had gathered to welcome their alpha. But as Kaelin dismounted and lifted Genevieve down beside him, the cheers died in their throats. Golden, amber, and crimson eyes locked onto her. The air grew thick with defensive pheromones and barely concealed disgust. To them, she was weak. She was prey. She was the enemy race. "Kaelin," a sharp, aristocratic voice cut through the tense silence. Lady Vivian Rutherford, a high-ranking Lycan noblewoman with sleek auburn hair and eyes like chipped ice, stepped forward. She was draped in crimson silk and silver armor, radiating an aura of lethal grace. Vivian had long been presumed the future queen of Ethelgard, and her gaze swept over Genevieve's dirt-stained face and ragged clothing with open revulsion. "You return to us victorious, my king, but why do you bring human vermin into the inner sanctum? Do we suddenly take stray dogs as pets?" A low, dangerous growl vibrated from Kaelin's chest, the sound echoing off the stone walls and forcing several heavily armored guards to instinctively drop to one knee. "You will guard your tongue, Lady Vivian," Kaelin commanded, his voice lethal and absolute. "This woman is Lady Genevieve Caldwell. She holds my life debt. She is under my absolute protection, and she will be treated with the highest reverence by every soul in this kingdom. Disrespect her, and you disrespect your alpha." Vivienne bowed her head, but Genevieve saw the murderous glint in her icy eyes. The court had accepted their king's command, but they had not accepted her. Over the next few weeks, Genevieve's world transformed. She was given chambers larger than Oakhaven's entire town square, bathed in steaming pools, scented with jasmine, and dressed in exquisite gowns of velvet and spun gold. The crowning moment of Kaelin's gratitude came on her third night, when he visited her chambers. Without a word, he stepped close, his towering frame dwarfing her, and gently clasped a heavy gold chain around her neck. Genevieve gasped. It was her mother's ruby pendant. Kaelin had sent his personal assassins to retrieve it from Bailiff Harrison's lockbox. Yet beneath the lavish gifts, Genevieve felt the suffocating weight of isolation. Kaelin was constantly pulled away by his duties, preparing for a looming conflict, leaving Genevieve to navigate the treacherous waters of the Lycan court alone. She spent her days seeking refuge in the Citadel's grand conservatory, an immense greenhouse filled with rare flora. It was here, surrounded by the familiar scent of herbs, that her apothecary instincts reawakened. It was also here that she made a terrifying discovery. While examining the royal physician's stores, Genevieve found a hidden ledger. She noticed a massive discrepancy in the inventory of a rare, highly toxic alpine root known as night terror sap. It was a coagulant that, when mixed with pure silver ash, created a poison specifically designed to bypass a Lycan's rapid healing factor. It was the exact distinct poison she had cleaned from Kaelin's wound months ago. Genevieve's blood ran cold. The royal physician couldn't have smuggled it alone. The poison required a human element, specifically human silver, refined in a way Lycans refused to practice. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the conservatory locked shut. From the shadows of the towering orchids stepped Chancellor Reginald Arys, Kaelin's most trusted political advisor, accompanied by Lady Vivian. "You are far too clever for a human stray," Chancellor Arys sneered, drawing a gleaming dagger from his robes. "I warned Kaelin his obsession with you would be a distraction, but it seems you are actually a liability." "You poisoned him," Genevieve whispered, clutching a heavy iron mortar defensively to her chest. "You supplied the assassins with the night terror sap, and the silver came from the human territories. From Lord Edric Balthazar, to be exact." Vivian smiled cruelly. "Balthazar wants the border expanded. Arys and I want a king who doesn't sympathize with weak humans. It was a perfect alliance. Kaelin was supposed to die in that snow. You ruined everything, little apothecary. And now, we will rectify that mistake." Before Arys could lunge, Genevieve didn't scream for help. Instead, she hurled the heavy iron mortar directly through the glass wall of the conservatory, shattering the thick panes into 1,000 pieces. The deafening crash echoed across the courtyard, instantly triggering the alarm bells of Ethelgard. Vivian cursed violently, transforming halfway, her claws extending as she lunged for Genevieve's throat. But Genevieve grabbed a handful of dried wolfsbane dust from the table and threw it directly into the noblewoman's face. Vivian shrieked, collapsing as the toxic powder burned her sensitive eyes and lungs. Arys lunged, but the heavy oak doors were suddenly obliterated, exploding inward in a shower of splinters. There stood King Kaelin, his eyes glowing a blinding feral gold, his chest heaving with unparalleled rage. The Alpha had heard the glass shatter. He had smelled the wolfsbane, and he had come to slaughter anyone who dared threaten his mate. Chancellor Aris immediately dropped his dagger, falling to his knees and shifting his features into a mask of desperate innocence. "My king, thank the gods you have arrived. The human witch attacked Lady Vivian with wolfsbane. I was merely trying to disarm her." "Silence!" Kaelin roared, a sound so devastating it shattered the remaining intact glass in the conservatory. He didn't even look at Aris. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, pulling Genevieve into his arms, his large hands frantically checking her body for wounds. Finding none, he pressed her face into his chest, burying his face in her hair as he took a deep, shuddering breath of her scent to calm the feral beast scratching at his mind. "I am unharmed," Genevieve said quickly, gripping his forearms. She turned her fierce gaze upon the trembling Chancellor. "Kaelin, it was him. Aris supplied the night terror sap that poisoned you. He is conspiring with Lord Balthazar of Oakhaven. They orchestrated the ambush at the winter solstice." Aris laughed, a shrill, nervous sound. "Preposterous! You would take the word of a human street rat over your trusted Chancellor. Where is her proof? She speaks treason." "I have the royal ledger," Genevieve countered, her voice steady and echoing with a newfound authority that shocked even herself. "And I know chemistry. Night terror sap leaves a distinct, permanent black residue when burned with human-forged silver. A residue I noticed staining the cuffs of your velvet robes, Chancellor. The exact same residue that was boiling in the king's blood when I cut the arrow from his chest." Kaelin's head slowly turned toward Aris. The Alpha King's golden eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. He seized Aris by the collar of his expensive robes, lifting the politician off the floor. With one violent rip, Kaelin tore the sleeve away. There, embedded deep into the fabric and slightly staining the skin of Aris's wrist, were the unmistakable permanent black scorch marks of the silver poison reaction. Aris paled, his arrogance instantly evaporating into raw terror. "Kaelin, my king, please. Balthazar promised us peace. You were leading us into a war with the human realms." "I am leading you into a new age," Kaelin snarled softly, his voice vibrating with lethal promise. "And treason is rewarded with the void." In a blur of motion, Kaelin's claws extended, and he executed his traitorous Chancellor on the spot. Lady Vivian, still coughing from the wolfsbane on the floor, wept as the royal guards finally stormed the room. Kaelin ordered her dragged to the dungeons to await a formal trial for high treason. That evening, the fortress of Ethelgard was consumed by an electric, terrifying tension. Kaelin summoned his entire court, his generals, and the visiting human envoys into the great hall. Among the human diplomats stood Lord Edric Balthazar, who had travelled to Ethelgard under the guise of negotiating winter trade routes. Balthazar looked smug, blissfully unaware of the afternoon's bloody revelations. The heavy iron doors of the great hall groaned open. King Kaelin strode in, radiating a terrifying dominance that forced every lichen in the room to bare their necks in submission. But the collective gasp that echoed through the hall was not for the king. It was for the woman walking at his side. Genevieve wore a gown of midnight velvet, embroidered with silver thread that mirrored the night sky. The ruby pendant rested flawlessly against her collarbone. But it was not the clothing that demanded respect. It was the way she carried herself. She did not cower. She walked with her head held high, a brilliant, unbreakable human, matching the stride of an apex predator. Kaelin ascended the obsidian steps to the throne, but he did not sit. He turned to face the vast sea of faces, his golden gaze locked directly onto Lord Balthazar. Lord Balthazar of Oakhaven. Kaelin's voice echoed like thunder. You come to my halls, seeking a treaty of peace. Yet, 3 months ago, you forged pure silver arrows, laced them with lichen poison, and paid assassins to hunt me in your forests. Balthazar's smug expression dissolved into sheer panic. He took a stumbling step backward. Your Majesty, this is a lie. I have always been a friend to the crown. You are a coward and a traitor. Genevieve's voice rang out, clear and cutting as glass. She stepped out from Kaelin's shadow, looking down at the man who had tormented her village and tried to sell her into slavery. You bled Oakhaven dry, Lord Balthazar. You starved your people to fund a secret war against the Lycans, conspiring with Chancellor Aris to murder a king. Balthazar pointed a shaking, fat finger at her. You are nothing but a filthy apothecary, a witch who consorts with beasts. You have bewitched the king. Kaelin descended 1 step, a low growl rumbling in his chest. She did not bewitch me. She saved me. When you sent your dogs to kill me, this woman, with nothing to her name but her courage, sacrificed her freedom to pull your silver from my heart. She has uncovered your treason, protected my kingdom, and proven herself possessed of more honor than any lord, human or Lycan, standing in this room. Kaelin gestured to his royal guards. Arrest Lord Balthazar. He will face Lycan justice for the attempted assassination of the crown. As Balthazar screamed and fought against the massive guards dragging him away, the great hall fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The Lycan nobility looked at Genevieve. They no longer saw a fragile human stray. They saw a woman who had defeated their corrupt chancellor, exposed a human lord, and stood fearlessly beside their terrifying alpha. Slowly, beginning with General Arthur Holden in the front row, the proud, ancient Lycans of Ethelgard dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in profound respect. Kaelin turned to Genevieve, his golden eyes softening with a love so deep it defied centuries of hatred between their species. He took her hands, raising them to his lips. You sacrificed everything for a stranger in the snow, Kaelin murmured. His voice meant only for her, even as the kingdom knelt before them. Will you do me the absolute honor of ruling this kingdom by my side, not just as my mate, but as their queen? Tears of joy pricked Genevieve's eyes. She thought of her mother, of the cold cellar in Oakhaven, and of the incredible, terrifying journey that had led her into the arms of the wolf. I will, Genevieve whispered, a brilliant smile breaking across her face. Always. And as the Alpha King pulled his queen into a passionate, breathtaking kiss, the roars of approval from the Lycan court shook the very foundations of the mountain, marking the dawn of a legendary new era. Did Genevieve's perilous journey and her breathtaking transformation from a starving, outcast apothecary to the legendary Alpha Queen of the Lycans leave you entirely breathless? If you loved this epic tale of sacrifice, betrayal, and a romance that defied the boundaries of 2 warring species, hit that like button and share this story with your fellow romance fantasy lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more heart-pounding, dramatic audio stories. What was your favorite twist? Let us know in the comments below.